Good evening. In keeping with the Deadline Club Awards tradition, instead of a speech, we offer journalists in conversation. And tonight we have two great ones with us to talk and maybe answer some of your questions about their field of specialty covering the 2024 presidential election. Jonathan Lemire is arguably one of the hardest working people in the news business. In addition to being the White House bureau chief for Politico, he's also the host of MSNBC's Way Too Early and a regular political analyst on Morning Joe and other NBC programs. He's also the author of a best-selling book, The Big Lie, which is now out on paperback. No copies are available in the lobby, but you can pick one up elsewhere. He previously was a White House reporter for the Associated Press, a colleague of mine, where he famously covered the Trump White House and questioned Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin at the 2018 summit in Helsinki. He earlier spent more than a decade at the New York Daily News, covering, among other things, City Hall and the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. Lemire Ball is the Wall Street Journal's senior political correspondent, covering campaigns, the White House, Congress, political personalities, and policy debates across America. She's also a frequent television commentator and author of Pelosi, a best-selling biography of the first woman House Speaker. Molly previously covered politics for Time, The Atlantic, Politico, and the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Her many honors include the Dirksen Award for reporting on Congress, the Gerald Ford Prize for covering the presidency, and the Toner Prize for excellence in political reporting. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our speakers tonight, Jonathan Lemire and Lemire Ball.
Thank you, everybody. We are delighted to be here. Two notes first. We had a mention of the New York Daily News Queens Bureau. That's where I met my wife, right there. We were both reporters at the News and met in Queens. And secondly, there was a call to cite examples of the need to keep NYPD radio transmissions open to the public and the press. Here's one. I used to cover the NYPD for the New York Daily News. Eric Garner's death came over the police radio. So this is an important issue. We're glad you're bringing it up. We are delighted to be here at what is a challenging time for our industry, and it's certainly an important moment for our country. Molly, there's an election. You may have heard.
What?
Yes. And we just learned, as of yesterday, there are going to be some debates. So why don't we start there? What do you think, and are they going to matter?
Well, I think they have to, right? I mean, we're all hoping that something shakes up this race. It's been essentially tied since it began. It's been in this state of stasis, and it's also the same campaign we covered 4 years ago. I mean, I'm trying to make it interesting here, but it's a real challenge to cover this race when it is quite literally the same two candidates as 4 years ago. A lot of the same dynamics. Obviously, a lot is different. So the debates. I think it's very interesting the way this all played out, don't you? It's the fact that it's occurring earlier than we're used to. The fact that it's occurring outside the usual structure of the Commission on Presidential Debates. You know, it was Trump who originally was going to blow up the commission when the Republican Party opted out of it. And so I was quite surprised to see that it was actually Biden who was the one who proposed going outside of that structure and sort of making these deals with the networks. And it was funny, did you see there was a comment from Frank Fahrenkopf, who chairs the Commission on Presidential Debates, about some of the arguments they're now having about like whether to include RFK, basically saying like, good luck, you decided to cut us out. We have experience in all these things. We actually know how to do this. And now you're gonna see why it was good to have an independent commission to handle all of this stuff. So, but I think, look, it's basically tied, but Biden is behind. He's been consistently slightly behind in all the polls. So he's the one who I think more than Trump needs a game change here, right? He's the one who needs some kind of shift in the dynamic because according to most of the polls, if the election was held today, he would lose. So, and you look back on 2020, I mean, nobody wants to look back on 2020, which is another, I think, dynamic affecting this race, but those were not debates that Trump really won, right? The first debate, he was all over the map. He was yelling. He was interrupting. He was giving people COVID. And so, he's been the one who's saying that he wants to debate because because he's trying to draw Biden into this situation and then and sort of highlight the reluctance, right, to put Biden on stage, given his demonstrated difficulties a lot of the time with public speaking. But I don't know that that's necessarily going to be. It's just going to be interesting which version of both of these candidates we end up seeing on stage. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of interesting dynamics here to follow on your point. First, Trump has been the one asking for these debates for months. Anytime, any place has been his motto. But he, by most measures, lost both debates in 2020. So that in itself is a risky strategy. We're also seeing from Trump and other Republicans, they belittle Biden, the president, so much and are setting expectations so low. It's not going to take much for President Biden to clear those expectations, assuming he doesn't just topple over at the podium at any point during the 2 hours. That's probably a win. So I'm confused by that strategy from Republicans. But I think you make a good point. There's a solid argument to be made to move up the debates. So many Americans vote early now. And the traditional schedule set up by the CPD, by the Debate Commission, we're talking late September, late October. A lot of Americans will have voted by then. So a September debate, an early September debate, makes sense. I think the tell card here, if you will, is the Biden camp wanting June. And I think that is a sense, to Molly's point, that they recognize they need to do something to change the dynamic. And their campaign has been consistent, and they've been consistent for a year, that they feel like, and polls back them up on this, most Americans to this point are not paying attention. Everyone in this room is. But they're not. And a lot of Americans don't think the race will end up being Biden versus Trump. Biden's too old. Trump will be in jail, whatever it is. And there's still this sense that someone else, and we see no one's happy about either candidate. There's a sense that, though, the Biden camp believes that when people perhaps resign themselves to saying this is a choice, it's a binary choice, A versus B, and they're reminded who Donald Trump is. That Donald Trump the last couple years, again, this is the Biden campaign's point of view, they feel like Trump has settled into background noise. People haven't really listened to him. We all have nostalgia for former presidents. People convince themselves, again, per Biden campaign, that look, the economy was better under Trump, et cetera, et cetera. And once they start hearing him again, they'll say, we can't go through this. And this debate pushes or pulls Donald Trump back into America's living room.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if they're right about that, just because, like, this idea that people don't know who Trump is, right, or are in denial or don't remember, I mean, we were all there, and you could easily see that dynamic working the other way if Biden were more well-liked. I mean, I thought it was so striking, the New York Times polls that came out, last week, where you had, in all of these swing states, the Democratic Senate candidate winning, but Biden behind, and in some cases by very large margins, which suggests that, like, the problem isn't policy, the problem isn't the Democratic brand, the problem isn't, people's, like, wistfulness for a better time or any of that. The problem seems to be Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think in 2020, a convincing argument can be made that Joe Biden was the one Democrat who could beat Donald Trump. There's a chance he's now the one Democrat who could lose to him.
And I don't know about you, but a lot of my Democratic sources are quite nervous about that. But then you have this projection of confidence by the Biden campaign, right? Which has been
very much so
their attitude from the beginning of like, oh, we've got this. And what I keep telling people who ask like, who's going to win this election is, well, I know, but I'm not going to tell you. But also that that Biden has a lot of structural advantages, but a lot of personal weaknesses. Yeah. That's been my sort of rubric for this whole election, because the political scientists who look at everything on like a 30,000-foot level and analyze like, well, where is the the GDP and the unemployment rate and all of those abstract factors that have nothing to do with the actual person in the White House, they would all tell you, okay, any president with this sort of landscape is in a good position. He's an incumbent, right? He's got a pretty good economy, although people do hate inflation, and we see that all over the world. But at the same time, like he's in some way he's the most unpopular incumbent in history. He's more unpopular than Jimmy Carter was at this point in his presidency, and how did that work out?
Right.
So, but what do you think about the confidence that the Biden campaign projects? Like, first of all, do you think it's real, or are they secretly wetting their pants? And second, do you think it's merited, or do you think they're sort of sleepwalking into a disaster?
So, I mean, the Biden campaign will point to that they have bested expectations time and again. They won the 2020 Democratic primary when very few expected them to. They won that general election. They the Democrats, with Biden as their leader, outperformed expectations in 2022, the midterms. There was no red wave. And I think that those of us who talk to the Biden campaign and White House every day, okay, we'll pull back the curtain here a little bit. It can get a little tiresome, the idea of like we're always right. But to this point, their track record does speak for itself. They've largely been right, but you're right every time until you're wrong. And we will have to see. I was speaking to a Democrat recently who did, on the Team Biden, who was expressing confidence in this race and saying, yeah, we're going to win comfortably by about a point. And that's where we are. Like, this race is going to be that close. That would be a comfortable win. But the Biden campaign does have structural advantages. They have a significant fundraising advantage. They have more organizations. They have more offices. And what they don't have is an ongoing criminal trial. So, Molly, do we think, and this is the great unknown, because we've never been here before. We've never had a former president face a criminal charge. We've never had a party's nominee facing a criminal charge. We may have a verdict in about a week's time. Is it going to matter?
Well, I would say, first of all, I'm of the opinion that everything matters, right? I hate this sort of like blasé attitude that I think a lot of political reporters adopt that's like, oh, well, everybody already knows who they're going to vote for, so like, why cover the election if that's really the case? So it's going to matter in some way, but we don't know how. And I think the signals that we have at this point for trying to figure out how it's going to matter are deeply mixed. On the one hand, I don't think people are paying very close attention to this trial. It's hard to follow. It's not televised. Even if it were televised, right? Anyone who's covered any kind of court case knows it's a lot of minutia, and it's very hard to like pull out the storyline and understand what's happening. A lot of people, I think, view it as old news, right? Because it concerns conduct that occurred before he was elected president, before the 2016 election, the whole Stormy Daniels thing. A lot of people find it, I think, a little bit distasteful, right? It's sort of tawdry and tabloid, and so this idea, this is going to shock you, and I'm glad you're sitting down, but that Donald Trump might have had a lot of like sleazy acquaintances.
What?
And might have been a bit of a womanizer.
No.
Like, that's not new to anyone, right? That's sort of part of his persona, and people have accepted it. And so the idea that he paid off a porn star ought to maybe be shocking in our politics, but hasn't been for a while. So that's one school of thought, is that nothing that happens here could really affect, right? We know that the devoted supporters of Donald Trump, at least, which we have to remember is only part of the sort of voting base that he needs to win, but they're pretty locked in, and increasingly, it's been fascinating to me to watch all these Republican elected officials come up here to Manhattan and stand at the courthouse and denounce it as a scam. And frankly, I think it's worrisome on the level of like delegitimizing our institutions and the rule of law and all that stuff.
The photograph yesterday of Doug Burgum and the other Republicans all in matching suits and ties. I believe Seth Meyers deemed it the four treasons, which is reasonably good.
And the Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House
of the
was there. Speaker of the
presidency.
House.
So let me just close the loop, and then I want to hear what you think. But you know, so you do have these polls that find that there is some small but significant percentage of current Trump supporters who say if he's convicted of a felony, that would cause them to reconsider, that would give them pause. What I don't see anyone polling is what would happen if he's acquitted. And I actually asked one of the pollsters who's surveyed this question, where are your numbers on a Trump acquittal? Because we have seen him time and again, you know, plant this narrative, seed this narrative of a witch hunt, and then claim vindication when anything short of, you know, full conviction comes out of it, starting with the Mueller report. And so I think we are underrating the possibility that he finds some way, either with a hung jury or with an acquittal, to come out of this actually better than he began. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, we should brace ourselves for the all caps Truth Social post that reads total exoneration or whatever. No, I think you're right. First of all, I think this is, of the four trials, this is widely considered the least serious. There's legal experts that we talk to each morning on the show say that DA's done a pretty good job in terms of prosecuting the case, but you're still relying on the likes of Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, and it just takes one juror, just takes one. Yes, there's polls that suggest a conviction would maybe move the needle a little bit. A race this close, maybe a little bit's enough, right? If it's just a shade here in Wisconsin, a shade here in Michigan, a shade here in Pennsylvania, that's it. President Biden gets a second term. But I agree. No one, I would say, in either camp thinks it's a game changer. Like, this is not going to change the trajectory of the race in a significant way. It's just a question of whether or not it changes it along the margins, but the margins might be enough. So, Molly, let's talk about our own experiences here a little bit. You hinted at the top. This is a sequel, right? We've had this race before. These are two men who are extremely well known. There are certainly surprise events that can occur between now and the election. There's not going to be a lot that we learn new about them, although we are seeing how they have perhaps changed in the last 4 years. So what are the challenges that you have faced in terms of just personal, day-to-day, trying to cover this story, cover this election, and bring it to your readers?
Well, it's hard to make it interesting, right? I mean, on a very basic level, right? What we're doing here is trying to inform but also entertain people and to try to get people engaged in this election that they have quite literally heard before is a challenge. On the other hand, I covered the 2012 election, so did you, and Mitt Romney was not the most stimulating character. So we have some experience covering elections that don't exactly get people's blood flowing. And there is a lot that's different. And then that was on my list of things to ask you as well, is sort of what is different about this race. I mean, the main thing that's different, right, is that Joe Biden has been president for 4 years now. So we know a lot more beyond the hypothetical about how he would govern. We've had a lot of situations come up that weren't the case, including 2 overseas wars that I'm very struck by how much blame he seems to take for these 2 wars that American troops are not involved in, and yet they seem to stick to them, right, to him. The people, voters, really seem to have internalized both the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza as sort of Biden's wars and see him as a wartime president when these are, you know, these are foreign conflicts occurring between foreign adversaries in which, you know, we have taken a side, but are not involved in that sense. So that to me is very striking, and he's clearly, you know, been damaged by it in a lot of ways. But in terms of, you know, how we cover it, I think you really put a finger on how we are approaching this, which is it's not about the characters as much as it is about the dynamics, right? Because the characters are so well known. We do not have to introduce Donald Trump to people, maybe young people. We do not have to introduce Joe Biden to people. Instead, it is much more, and I guess you could say that in a way it is much more sort of pure and wholesome on a journalism level, that it is much more about policy and what they would do in office and how, you know, they have governed, because the characters are much less of a factor when they are so well known.
Yes, and I also think the challenge, I guess, for all of us maybe in this room is that it's not just an election about characters, it's not just an election about the horse race, it's about the stakes of this election. And I do think that these are two men who we know so well, but are presenting remarkably different visions for the future of this country. This is not shades of gray. This is white or black. And I think that is something that we all have, everyone in this room who does journalism has to grapple with and present as best we can, as well as the day-to-day developments of the campaign. So we're at the point now where we can take a couple of questions. James Martinez, he's right there, the handsome man who introduced us, has the mic. If someone wants to flag him down and ask a question, please do. There you go.
Everyone in this room already knows anything. They don't have any questions.
I just wanted to ask, I don't know if you brought it up, but how much do you think the current Trump trial plays into the debate? I know we are months away and there are other pending trials, but I just wanted a little analysis on how much you think that could play into the race.
Well, I think it's a hard one because I think it colors the race certainly, but the Biden campaign has been kind of confused as to what to do with it. The president himself doesn't want to talk about it. They've said that, look, we need to have a bright line between the White House and the Department of Justice. I mean, Trump every day on Truth Social calls it the Biden DOJ or the Biden trial, or links Alvin Bragg and Joe Biden with no evidence of that. So they're trying to keep their distance from it in some ways. Yet there are some Democrats who are like, this is a golden opportunity. How can you not make your argument this simple? One of these guys is going to jail. He's not our guy. Vote for our guy. But that's a harder thing to do. As Molly said earlier, a case that a lot of people don't even fully understand. And we've seen the president make some jokes about stormy weather and things like that. But they've largely left it alone. What do you think?
No, I think, and it's kind of weird, isn't it? Because it has been this very one-sided argument in the court of public opinion. And, you know, I get why Biden doesn't want to be out there seeming to put pressure on the judicial system. A big part of what he has sought to do with his presidency is restore, you know, the independence of the Justice Department and some of these norms. But there's no reason you couldn't have 10 Democratic congressmen up there at the courthouse in the same way that Republican congressmen are doing, or whatever, you know, matching pajamas they want to wear, because it has been in the court. You know, Trump realized very early on that he was on trial in the court of public opinion in a much more significant way than he was on trial in a New York courtroom. And he's making the same argument in both venues, which is it's him against the system. It's him against the institutions of government. And so in that courtroom, he's saying that, you know, this is all a politically motivated witch hunt. And outside the courtroom, he's saying the reason you should vote for me is because I am the one who poses such a danger to the establishment that they are trying to get me on all of these different fronts. And you don't have a counter argument to that in the public sphere, except maybe on cable news, and I think that that's pretty striking. So I wonder whether and how, and I do wonder, to your question, whether this debate gambit has come somewhat out of the frustration of the Biden camp that the trial hasn't broken through in a bigger way. In those New York Times swing state polls last week, 29% of voters said they were following the trial closely. That's a pretty low number for the first ever criminal prosecution of a former president and current presidential nominee.
Time for another question if someone has it.
Yeah, so Joe Biden, I understand, really polls badly, but you know who polls worse is Rishi Sunak and Macron and every leader in the Western world. So maybe people our age are just grumpy.
No, it's a very fair point, and it's one that frankly the people around the president make often. They look around and they show world leaders. Macron's a great example, who polling poorly wins re-election. I think there is a sense. I was actually just speaking to someone close to the president about this the other day, that people are still in like a post-COVID funk. There's a malaise. No one's happy. Inflation's up. things have changed, not for the better. There's just a sense that everything's not quite as good as it was a few years ago. So there's some anger and frustration at the person in charge. That said, the person in charge, I mean, we'll see about Rishi Sunak, but the person in charge has still largely been winning. And that's what they think could happen here again in this democracy.
I think that's right. And I think that you point to a really important phenomenon. And part of that is just that inflation makes people really mad. People hate it when stuff gets more expensive. And that happens all over the world. And so part of this is just totally structural. But I was just on a college campus talking to young voters. And they do really feel, they're annoyed that the president is so old, that so many of our leaders are so old. In a time when there is so much anger and frustration in the electorate, there's a feeling like the political system isn't responding to that in any way. So I think, we can talk about what's the chicken and what's the egg, but I think both those phenomena feed off of each other.
Our time is up. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.